I have a friend at the White House who told me to never underestimate Donald Trump's desire to win a Nobel Peace Prize. He's still angry that Barack Obama has a Nobel Peace Prize. And that's why he initiated talks with the North Koreans, for example. That's why he keeps talking about a grand deal. That's why he said that he could influence the Russians into ending the Ukraine war within 24 hours of taking the oath of office. None of those things have happened yet. But I think he really is optimistic about some grand deal that is going to make him the peacemaker of the Middle East. Now, if there is some kind of a deal, it's going to be with a rump Iran. Maybe it's going to be with some temporary government that takes over after the collapse of the present one. Who knows? Who knows what it's going to look like? But I think he really believes he can make a deal, and he should be rewarded for it.
Well, it's a great North Star to have. So if he's really aiming for that, it's a great objective, and that's a good news. Which goes to the second part of the question, which you already hinted on, is how much influence does he have over Israel? And kind of links to another question is, how involved do you think the US will get?
Ooh. I think he does have influence over Israel, but not as much as he probably thinks he does. Benjamin Netanyahu is very stubborn and is very, very willing to act unilaterally. Disagreements with American presidents have never held him back in the past. The second part of your question is the one that I think is unanswerable. We really don't know what it's going to look like. We really don't know, because we haven't really heard from the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis. We haven't heard from the Jordanians. Haven't said a word. The Egyptians haven't said a word. I think they're all panicked at the idea of what this might look like at the end. And so they're waiting to see how it plays out before making their own positions known.
Yeah, I think Saudi's position is really tricky, because Saudi would benefit from a weaker Iran. But also, I think Saudi would lose more and would be more at risk from a destabilized Iran or a regime change. How much influence does Saudi have? And also, how strong is Saudi militarily?
Oh, no.
If you compare it to, let's say, Israel. Not that they're not enemies, and they're talking about, obviously, being part of the peace accords. But
sure,
putting that aside, I'm just curious how strong that other military power is.
It's not. It's not. There's an ongoing joke in the Middle East that it's hard to find any Saudis in the Saudi military. They're all Pakistanis, all of them. The only ones who are Saudis are the generals, the leaders. Literally, I had a great friend when I was living in Bahrain. I was assigned to the State Department at the American Embassy in Bahrain, and I had a friend who was he was a Kuwaiti American who was the head of American Express for the Gulf, and he got drafted by the Kuwaiti military. And so I said, "I thought you were Kuwaiti. You're drafted into the Kuwaiti military." He said, "Oh no, it's a big joke." So he goes to Kuwait. On the first day, he said everybody was there. It was about 30 people, and about a third of them were sheikhs. And then the second day, about half of them showed up. And the third day, he was the only Kuwaiti who showed up for training. And then after that, he just quit. You just walk out, fly back to Bahrain. So what they do is they just replace all these people with Pakistani volunteers. And that's who fights the wars for the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and others in the Gulf.
Not that it obviously is relevant to this discussion, because Saudi is not an enemy of Israel, but Saudi doesn't stand a chance in front of Israel either?
Not a chance.
Wow.
Not a prayer.
Egypt?
The Egyptians are different. Hosni Mubarak used to say that Egypt was safe just because of its overwhelming population. Egypt has what? 180 million people? So compared to 9.8 million for Israel, nuclear weapons aside, the Egyptians are perfectly fine, just the way they are.
How about Turkey? What role does Turkey play in all this? We talked about how Turkey and Israel, despite hating one another, they work together when it comes to Syria. What about in this case?
Turkey's really an enigma in this whole thing. For many, many years, for decades, the Turks and the Israelis had very close relations, very close diplomatic relations, close military relations. And then President Erdogan flipped that about 15 or 20 years ago. Conversely, the Greeks had traditionally very close relations with the Arabs, to the point where all of the Palestinian terrorist groups, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, General Command, Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Abu Nidal organization, they all had a presence in Athens. So if the Turks are going to be with the Israelis, the Greeks are going to be with the Arabs. Then the Turks flipped and they began challenging the Israelis. Well, if the Turks are going to be pro-Arab, then the Greeks felt they had to flip. So now the Greeks and the Cypriots are pro-Israel and the Turks are pro-Arab. And they're like watching each other to see what the other one's going to do next. But with that said, the Turks and the Israelis worked together to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. And they worked together very smoothly and very quickly. I know a lot of Middle East watchers because we've spent our entire adult lives watching these issues develop. I don't think anybody expected Assad to fall apart in 1 week. And I think in a great part it was because of the Turks.
How capable is the Turkish military when it compares something to Israel?
It's quite capable. It's very large. It's very well trained. And remember, it's a part of NATO. So it has almost exclusively American, French, and British weapons. You know, there's one interesting thing there. One of the things the Saudis used to do, just for the purpose of maintaining good relations with the Russians and the Chinese, the Saudis are almost exclusively the users of American weapons and weapon systems, right? And American jets. But they'll buy Russian systems or Chinese systems and then never take them out of the crates. They'll buy them so they can maintain good trade relations with the Russians and the Chinese and just keep them in a warehouse somewhere, never to be used. So they've got the equipment. They just don't do anything with it. The Turks, on the other hand, have Western equipment, but then also have been dabbling in Russian equipment just to maintain good relations with the Russians. So I think the Turks are very well provided for and very capable.
Politics is just so confusingly interesting. But Turkish capability, military capability, should not be ignored. And again, I know this is not even a worst case scenario. I think it's not something that should even be discussed. But just for people to understand the strength of Israel in the region, does Turkey stand a chance against Israel militarily?
Again, nuclear weapons aside.
Nuclear weapons and NATO aside.
And NATO aside, yeah, the Turks are tough and strong and mean and very capable. Yes.
Interesting.
And keep in mind too, if I could make one other point, keep in mind too that the Turks are very well skilled in guerrilla warfare, anti-guerrilla warfare, because of so many years of fighting the PKK.
Yeah, true. How about Hezbollah? Hezbollah surprised me, and I was talking to the IDF spokesperson 2 days ago, and that was one of the biggest surprises for the IDF, is that they expected Hezbollah to be one of the first proxies, or the only proxy left along with the Houthis, to respond, and they didn't. I was told that they faced pressure from a day after the Israeli attack. The Lebanese government, with the support of Saudi and the French, warned them that they will interfere if Hezbollah backs Iran. So does that mean that Iran's grip over the most important proxies loosening, or is that just strategic so Iran has a final card they can play?
I think it's a combination of the two, actually. On the one hand, the Iranians still have Hezbollah as a proxy. On the other hand, they can't supply Hezbollah anymore because Assad's gone. Couple that with the fact that Hezbollah was decapitated by these Israeli operations. I still shake my head like, what an incredible, absolutely incredible intelligence operation this was. I still can't even fathom the work that went into decapitating Hezbollah like they did. But remember, not only did they do this pager operation, they also detonated explosives in cell phones, and they bombed Hezbollah and took out the leadership, the second level leadership, and the third level leadership. So for all intents and purposes, at least for the next 6 months, there is no such thing as Hezbollah. Not really. It's going to have to reconstitute itself. But they're in no position right now whatsoever to launch anything against the Israelis.